Come along, rise and shine. Come along and rise and shine. Come on and shine. Come along and ride on a light walker Johnny. Light walker Johnny. Yeah. Come along and ride on a light walker Johnny. Yeah.
Hello, beloveds. This is Elisa with Heart of Inspiration. And here at this channel and on this podcast, we help you lead a whole and healed, peaceful, and prosperous life. And today, on episode, I believe it is 28, we are going to be talking about the principle of rhythm. We kind of suspended for a couple of weeks our discussion on the Hermetic Principles, and I really felt led that it was time to get back to it. So if you're watching this on YouTube, we're going to cut to the presentation, and if you're listening to it, we're about to start talking about the principle of rhythm. Okay, it is one of the 7 Hermetic Principles. Now, just so we can get a quick review of the Hermetic Principles, okay? The Hermetic Principles are a part of Hermetic philosophy that has its roots in ancient Egypt. This wisdom was passed to mankind through the Master of Masters, Hermes Trismegistus. Hermes was the father of occult or hidden wisdom, the founder of astrology, and the discoverer of alchemy. Hermes became Thoth. He was renamed Thoth or deified by the Egyptians, and the Greeks called him the messenger of the gods. Now, Hermetic philosophy, okay, as a practice or as a concept, these teachings have historically been reserved for a select few, as most weren't ready, right, to hear or to understand the Hermetic Principles. This has and always is sacred wisdom and sacred information. And really, by and large, the majority of people didn't necessarily have the capacity to, or the conscious level enough to really understand and internalize and integrate this philosophy and the principles into their daily lives. And now we're in a much better evolutionary stage. So now if you're going through your ascension process, your awakening process, and you really are making, you've been really studying and learning, this is an amazing, that now it's time. You're in a good space to learn these and to be able to bring them as part of your daily life. We must remember, though, at all times, this is true alchemy, the mastery of mental forces to manipulate material reality. So again, true alchemy is the mastery of mental forces to manipulate material reality. Now, thus far in my series here on the Hermetic Principles, we did one where with the overall law of all is all, universal collective basic consciousness, that we're all from source. We've then also gone through the principle of mentalism, the principle of correspondence, the principle of vibration, and the principle of polarity. That puts us at the 5th, which is the principle of rhythm. And then we just had the last 2, cause and effect and gender. Okay, so if you've missed any of them, they're here on the podcast list, either the playlist on YouTube or the podcast listing on your streaming services. Okay, so go back and review those so you can be caught up. There's some really good information there. So let's get into it now. We're talking this week about the principle of rhythm. Now, the principle of rhythm. Now, this principle builds upon the last, right? It builds upon the principle of polarity. And it embodies this truth. In everything, there is a measured motion. So I want you to remember that in absolute everything, there's a measure or measured motion. That's going to mean, some of you that, might remember in church, there was a song and a saying that trouble don't last always. In Ecclesiastes, I believe it is, there's a time to mourn, a time to live, a time to die, right? All of this. There are times and measures for everything. In fact, in that passage in Ecclesiastes, you will notice that for every negative there was a positive, and for every positive there was a negative. That there itself embodies the principle of rhythm. Tides ebb and flow, pendulums swing left and right, life and death and rebirth. To everything there is a time and a rhythm. To everything there is a time and a season. And pardon my cat Gemini. So in the Kabbalion says, for the principle of rhythm, everything flows out and in. Everything has its tides. All of things rise and fall. The pendulum swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. So there's many parts to this one principle, and we're going to begin to dive deeper into it. Remember, everything has a flow, right? Energy flows in and out. The tides flow in and out. Everything cannot stay super positive at all times. It can't stay up. Cute song, right? I mean, it's a catchy song, up and it's stuck. But trust me, what goes up must come down. Everything has its tides. All of things rise and fall. And we're going to talk about each of these. The pendulum swing to the right is the measure to the left. Rhythm compensates. Now, the principle of rhythm, this principle ties together polarity and vibration simultaneously. Because, listen, if you think about a pendulum swing, once in motion, vibration, it will swing equally left and right, polarity. So it literally, it will vibrate to the opposing poles, opposing sides. That in and of itself is the bright principle of polarity. Okay, so we see that each of these principles builds upon the last. So understand that once you set something in motion, right, there's going to be a pendulum swing, an ebb and a flow to it. So we have to be prepared with how to deal with the ebb and the flow. Okay, this creates a cycle of manifestation that cannot and is not stopped ever. You can change the cycles. You can start the vibration. You can vibrate a different pendulum. You can change it, but there is always the cycle. In other words, you will always be creating something because that is the rhythm of the universe. There is no way to ever stop yourself from being able to create or manifest. It is your natural rhythm. Each world, solar system, ecosystem, all of them have a point of beginning. And then it begins to evolve. So if you think about it, when you bring a pendulum back, or you bring an arrow back in a bow, or a rock back in a slingshot, you can only bring it backwards or in a negative direction for so long. So that then becomes your starting point. That becomes your 0 point. Right? So if you think about it that way, at some point then it gets released, creation, and then it's going to get to a great evolutionary height, or it's going to swing all the way to the right. Okay, if you bring it back to the left, it's going to swing all the way to the right in its evolutionary height. And then it's going to devolve to an evolutionary low or density. In other words, as high as it goes, then it becomes equally as dense on the back end. And then it goes in an upswing, reaching a new height, but with a greater consciousness. So what I will say to that is this. If you think about it, this literally just came to me. As we look at Earth's and humanity's evolution, if you really look back at Egyptian spirituality, Egyptian, Mayan, Incan, all of this, right? But I'm going to specify Kemet and Egypt. Because if you look back at that and the great spiritual and esoteric and metaphysical, heights that the Egyptians reached, and remember, these Hermetic principles were put forth at the very beginning. These ruled Egypt. This is a great understanding of everything spiritual and esoteric, an amazing metaphysical understanding of life and consciousness. That was way back when. And then supposedly we've gone through all of this evolution, right? We've gone through this technological evolution. We've gone through, manufacturing and mechanical and all of these evolutionary steps. But the further we've gone in our evolutionary height, the more dense, or I feel like we reached a pinnacle, and then now we're kind of devolving back because everything is very, very dense at this point in the life cycle or evolutionary cycle or even the ascension cycle of humanity. So I feel like when you swing all the way, you swing down to a low. Come on, baby. You swing down to a low, and then you start back on this upswing where you then go to a more evolutionary period of time. So when you reach that new height, you have a greater consciousness. And I feel like we got extremely dense. We were at this great high point as it swung, and then we swung back, right? And then what happened is then we got to a point, now we're getting to a point where we're reaching a greater consciousness. Like we've come through another evolutionary and we're getting back to be on that upswing. So I don't know, I just found that interesting. Let's get back. All right. So we are at that point, I believe, in the upswing where we are reaching a new height, but this time with a greater consciousness. So here you have another pendulum again, and the principle of rhythm. See, in Hermetics, those that master this principle do so by understanding that we can never stop the rhythm of the universe, but instead flow with the rhythm of the universe. In other words, you're never going to have a time where everything is always up and stuck. You're just not. There is always going to be a lull, a valley. It's got what goes up must come down. What swings all the way to the highest height is going to have to swing backward and equally as high on the back end. So that's always going to happen. But how do we manage to kind of raise above that? We can't stop it, but how do we manage it? As we master the principle of mentalism, the very first principle we reviewed, and the principle of vibration. So keeping your mind at a certain frequency, we raise ourselves from unconsciousness to consciousness. This is ascension. The master then chooses to reside in a conscious or higher mental state through the law of neutralization. Now let's go into this a little bit deeper. Basically what we're saying is as you choose to live in higher consciousness, you become less affected by the lows experienced in the natural rhythm of energy. And through the law of neutrality, you then become an observer of the lows in the rhythmic cycle rather than an active participant in those lows in experience. In other words, you see it happening, but your vibration, your frequency stays high because you know just as much as you ended up on the back end of this, you're going to end up back on the front end. It's going to happen. And once that is mastered, you then escape the swing of the pendulum, the lower portion of the rhythmic cycle, and remain on the conscious plane. So you're always observing it and you remain neutral. So the highs don't affect you either as either. Okay, so you're not swayed back and forth. You remain neutral and a higher dimensional observer of things and not as an active participant in duality. As our rhythmic or frequency set point raises, expansion happens within, and therefore expansion occurs without in our lives. As we remain in lower rhythm or contraction, we will see more pain, trauma, and tearing down of previously expanded structures. Do you know all I did is instead of vibration, I put rhythm there. It's the same thing. If we stay at a set point where we're becoming the observer and we don't actively participate in the pendulum swing, we will reign in a higher rhythmic frequency. And therefore, as that pendulum swings back and forth, we're not swayed. Not swayed. Now, how else does the law of neutrality work, or the principle of rhythm? Remember, we went through a few different statements here. I'm going to go back to what the Kabbalion says. Everything flows out and in. So we've talked about that. Everything has tides. All of things rise and fall. We just got done talking about the pendulum swing to the right is the measure of the swing to the left. And now we're going to get really in depth into this concept at the very end of the principle. Rhythm compensates. So if we know all of these things, basically what that statement, those two words are saying in and of itself, is that the universe is going to take care of you. The universe knows there's ups and there's downs, but the universe is going to compensate you for every down. Now, the law of compensation is that the swing in one direction determines the swing in the opposite direction. So that's part of that swinging of the pendulum, right? We see this in the physical world all the time. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. You throw a ball up in the air with a certain amount of force, it's going to come down with that gravity is going to then pull it down. It's still going to contain the same amount of energy that you put in it. You put in there the force to bring it to the top. That swing to the top happened and then zeroed out, and now that equal amount of energy will be put back in it to bring it down to the ground. Everything goes one to the other. Have you ever noticed that it seems like people will get super, super rich and then all of a sudden be super, super poor, and then they'll be super, super rich and super, super poor? Well, those people aren't, there's an ebb and a flow to everything, but you don't have to necessarily be as affected by it. But you see what I'm saying? Like there's tides come in, tides go out. I mean, there's a rhythm to everything. The moon gets full, the moon becomes new. The moon becomes full, the moon becomes new. It's a rhythm. Action and reaction. Now, as we take this to the Hermetic practice, or the practice of the mind, this then means that one who has great joy also has great sorrow. Okay? You can't have them without both. You can't have one without the other. The law of compensation further says to the Hermeticists, if you've got the capacity to have great happiness, you have the capacity for great sorrow. The negative swing occurs first before you are quote unquote compensated by the positive. And this compensation can happen either in this lifetime or another as lifetimes are continuous. I really want to talk about this here. I want to talk to you about this face to face. So what basically this is saying to you, and I think I go over this in the next slide, but I wanted to say this to you. When you experience great trauma in your life, the universe will always compensate you on the back end with great triumph. Great sorrow is compensated by great joy. Great unrest is compensated by great peace. There is a compensation. Do not ever think that your suffering is in vain unless you choose to stay in that suffering space. Now, if you're not going to elevate yourself, then we have a problem. It's a whole separate issue, right? Because you're choosing not to elevate. That's a whole thing. And that whole thing has to be dealt with in a whole different way. But never think that the suffering is in vain when you are seeking and striving to be the best you can possibly be. Ever. Okay? All right. Or I should say that you are actively working on your spiritual self. When you're actively doing that, there's absolutely no reason why you should not know that all of that you've been through in this lifetime or past, you will be compensated for. Because time is continuous, so it doesn't matter if it's this lifetime or next. Probably a lot of us are getting compensated for a lot of ish that happened in past lifetimes. All right. Let's go to the next slide. As one masters their mind and goes to the higher plane of the ego, in other words, kind of coming out of the depths of ego, one can escape that feeling of the depth of pain, of the negative swing in the cycle. This is both the law of compensation and the process of neutralization and practice simultaneously. Because you see, once you understand that there is no pain or hurt or trauma that will not be compensated by the universe, you can then begin to raise yourself up out of the life is happening to me. Why are these things happening to me? And get out of that ego space and come up above and say, what's the purpose? And even though I went through all of that, there's a brighter day ahead. Brighter days are ahead. You just have to be willing to take a hold of them. But brighter days are ahead. Everything that has happened to you, everything, you will be compensated for. So what happens is it's not that we don't experience the negative swing. But in all honesty, we know that it's going to happen. So we raise above it to prepare ourselves for that fact. And because we've prepared ourselves for that fact, we then have the capability to not be quite as affected by it, which is quite the beautiful thing. We can look at it from a space of neutrality and understand, oh, that's going to happen, but I'm not going to let that take me off my square. I'm not going to let that stop my vibrational height. Instead, I'm going to use it to propel me to an even deeper and higher level of consciousness, because I can now observe it on the outside, transmute the energy on the upswing, and integrate it and raise my consciousness even higher. I will be compensated for everything. So there's no need to get in my feels, so to speak, coming from a Cancer, about the pain and the trauma. And I don't mean that to sound flippant. And I'm not saying you shouldn't feel it, because that energy is necessary. You grab that energy and you transmute it and you translate it and you reintegrate it, and it propels you rather than hinders you. Use it. It's there for a reason and a season. And beloved, some of us had some karma we had to clear. And honestly, some of us had some ish we had to go through in this lifetime in order to achieve the heights that we were meant to achieve. That pendulum, that swing can't swing high without a big swing back. And it takes a lot of energy to yank that, to pull that slingshot way back so that that rock can go really far. You've been pulled way back. You have been pulled on that swing way high. And now, after all of that, and all of the fear and the pain and the hurt and the trauma and the failure, the mistakes, you're able to take all of that now and transform that into power, love, light, wisdom, healing capabilities, empathic abilities. You're able to use it for the light and see it for what it was. The principle of rhythm. We must flow with the rhythm of energy of the universe and not fight against it. As we do that, we will discover the ability to stay high in vibration and the stability to keep our thoughts in control and order. Now, beloveds, thank you so very much for being here today and being with me while we investigate and discuss the principle of rhythm. There's a couple of things that are going to be going on here at the time of this recording. It is before May 8th of 2021. And for those of you that are listening to this before May 8th, I am having a cord cutting ceremony on May 8th at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Central, and that would be 8 a.m. Pacific. Now, that's going to be to cut these cords and these ties that bind. That's the day before Mother's Day. So let me tell you, y'all, baby mamas and whatnot, and baby daddies and whomever else, or exes, or what have you, if you got some ties to somebody and they are cords and you do not want those ties anymore, and they have become toxic to you, then I'm going to ask you to join me for this. Now, there's a link down at the bottom. It's to an event. It's Eventbrite. I posted it there this time, and so I want you to go there. The cost of this 1.5 hour session is $47, and we're also going to be able to give you some tools in order to assist you in maintaining your freedom from this toxic energy. Also, feel free. There's a Linktree link also. And I want you guys to, if you are considering becoming a spiritual counselor, energy healer, or just walking in this walk and doing what you are meant to do in your purpose, I want you to consider becoming a member, or I should say a student of Lightworker Academy. We right now have it's a masterclass. It's a spiritual counselor energy healing 12-week certification course. And if you're ready to walk in purpose and learn both the spiritual modalities and the depths of the metaphysical, as well as get your business off the ground, because we do both. A lot of people do one or the other, but we do both at Lightworker Academy. I want you to book a 15-minute call and let's talk and see if enrollment makes sense for you. Guys, thank you so very much for being here. Peace, love, blessings, and joy be unto you today, tomorrow, and for all eternity. I love y'all really much, very much. Namaste. Bye-bye.